Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second Saturday Silence at the Circle Cinema in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Today we've got two terrific movies for you that were filmed in 1918, starring two of the greatest stars of the silent era of the 19-teens. And that is Roscoe Arbuckle and Buster Keaton. I'll get to a little more of them. First, I want to introduce you to our theater here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's built right on Highway 66, the mother route. In 1928, it opened up. And this very organ is 93 years old. It was playing for the movies. This is a pipe organ, of course. Playing for the movies for the first year that the Circle was in operation. So what you're hearing is very authentic. Now, getting ready to tell you a little bit about Roscoe Arbuckle and Buster Keaton. They didn't join together until about 1917. Roscoe Arbuckle was born in Smith Center, Kansas in 1887. And when he was about 22 years old, he had been doing a little bit of vaudeville. He was a singer. He was a large man. He was almost 6'2", or anyway, right around 300 pounds, but it wasn't fat. His nickname was Fatty because that was the character he played in the movies, but his name was Roscoe. And if you came and called him Fatty, he would say, "I have a name, you know." So anyway, he got into the movies in about 1909, and before you knew it, he was at Mack Sennett's Keystone studio helping with the Keystone Cops. He was a Keystone Cop. In the accompanying photograph, you see Roscoe Arbuckle at the very far right, and then three faces down to his right, you'll see Al St. John, who was Roscoe's nephew and also helped Roscoe make his movies in later years. He was also in some of Buster's movies. Anyway, meanwhile, Buster Keaton was growing up literally on the vaudeville stage because his mother and dad were traveling troopers, vaudeville troopers, and he kind of interjected himself onto the stage when he was just a toddler, and they found out that the crowds loved him, and so they became the three Keatons: Mama, Daddy, and Little Buster. And Buster didn't have anything to do with the movies until later, but they were a top vaudeville act until the act broke up in 1917, and Buster decided that he was going to go out on his own and become a solo vaudeville star. And then legend has it that it was an accidental meeting on a street in New York in 1917 between Roscoe Arbuckle and his manager, Lou Anger, who ran across Buster on the sidewalk. And of course, I'm not sure how close that Buster and Roscoe were at the time, but Roscoe had seen the three Keatons, so he was familiar with Buster's vaudeville act, and Buster had seen Roscoe's movies, so they were familiar with each other's type of work. And it was suggested by Roscoe that Buster come over and take a look at what he was doing, making movies there in New York. And that day in 1917, and Buster took him up on it. He came over, and history was made that day because Buster was invited by Roscoe to join him in creating a comedy scene. It was the first time that Keaton was on camera, and if you go out to YouTube and search on The Butcher Boy, you can see that very first exposure that Buster had to filmmaking, and he took to it like a duck to water. And he gave up a lucrative vaudeville job, took a huge cut in salary, but he didn't care. He was doing what he wanted to do. And he went from being Arbuckle's bit player to his co-star to his co-director, and throughout 1918 and 1919, he made movies with Roscoe Arbuckle. And then World War I intervened, and Buster was of an age to be drafted. And so he got sent to France for the duration. After the war was over, he came back and continued to make movies with Roscoe Arbuckle. And then in 1920, Roscoe was given the opportunity to make feature-length movies, and they turned his studio, where they had been making these two-reel short comedies, turned that over to Buster and made it the Buster Keaton studio. Over the next 3 years or so, Buster turned out about 19 of the greatest two-reel comedies ever. Meanwhile, Arbuckle started into making feature-length movies, and then disaster happened. This was a scandal. It was journalism at its worst. What happened was there was a party that Roscoe threw on Labor Day in 1921 at a hotel in San Francisco. And this is during Prohibition, of course, so he was guilty of violating the liquor laws, but he just kind of threw it open to anybody that knew him, could just wander in and have a drink and have a good time. One of them was Virginia Rapet, a young actress, and the other one was her friend Maud Delmont. And then something happened in room 1219 where Virginia Rapet became very, very ill, and she ended up going to the hospital and dying. At that point, Delmont claimed, without proof, that Roscoe had brutalized her. And she scared up a prosecuting attorney who wanted to make a name for himself by going after a well-known movie star. And they actually filed charges against Roscoe Arbuckle for the death of Virginia Rapet. And they actually hauled him off to jail, and he spent a couple of weeks in the slammer, and they had a trial. And they took him to trial, and the jury came back deadlocked. 10 of the 12 wanted to acquit him, but there were 2 very vocal holdovers who would not have it. So it was a deadlocked jury, and they had a second trial. And that also ended up in a hung jury. And then they had a third trial. Meanwhile, the prosecution case, while it was weak to begin with, had just dissolved. It had just fallen apart. And Maud Delmont's story kept changing, so they couldn't very well put her on the stand against him. And this one ended differently. The jury not only deliberated for only 6 minutes, they spent 5 of those minutes writing a letter of apology to Roscoe Arbuckle for what he had to suffer through. And he was exonerated of all charges, even with an unprecedented letter from the jury apologizing to him. And that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because the yellow journalism of the day, the San Francisco Examiner and all the other Hearst newspapers, had made a big deal of this scandal. And Hearst himself said later that the Arbuckle scandal sold more newspapers for him than anything since the sinking of the Lusitania. And the movie industry had blackballed him, had banned his movies, even had some of them burned, would not allow them to be shown, and that ban stayed in place for a while, even though he had been declared innocent. And his career was ruined. He couldn't find work. It destroyed his way of making money. It destroyed him as a person. And it's such a sad thing. Finally, in the early 1930s, he was back. He made a movie or two and had just started celebrating getting to make another feature-length movie when he died in his sleep of a heart attack in 1933. He was only 46 years old. And it was a very, very sad thing. If you want to learn more about it, there's all kinds of information on the internet. There's also a couple of books that came out. This one called Frame Up. It was written by Andy Edmonds in 2003, tells the untold story of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. And then about 10 years later, this Room 1219 by Greg Marriott. The Life of Fatty Arbuckle, the Mysterious Death of Virginia Rapé, and the Scandal That Changed Hollywood. I recommend them both. They're just full of information if you want to learn more about this black page in American journalism. Okay, but all this was to happen later. This came about in 1921. These movies we're going to see today were made in 1918, and they feature Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton and Al St. John. As I said earlier, that was Keaton's, rather Roscoe's nephew, and the leading lady was a gal named Alice Lake. Remember, this is 1918. We were getting ready to go to war with Germany, so you'll see some anti-German things, and particularly anti-Kaiser Wilhelm on the screen, because that was the timber of the time. But one other thing that you'll see, actor is a tall fellow with a top hat that keeps getting knocked off. And I want you to know that that's Joe Keaton. He is Buster's daddy, and he appeared in a lot of Buster's movies through the years. One other thing about the great stone face, Buster never smiled in his movies. Today, you will see him not only smile, but laugh out loud, because he did that occasionally in the Arbuckle movies. Okay, watch for that, and if we're ready in the booth, just got the thumbs up, let her rip, Tater Chip. Let's watch Roscoe Arbuckle, Buster Keaton. year was 1918, and that was the Bellboy, starring Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, Buster Keaton, Al St. John, and Alice Lake, with a little snippet in there of Joe Keaton, Buster's daddy. Now we turn to the movie that they made right after this one in 1918. This one has a whole different type of setup. This is a satire. And what were they satirizing? They were satirizing making movies. A movie making fun of making movies. And you'll see all kinds of inside jokes there that have nothing to do with the plot or anything else except having fun. This movie is called Moonshine, and it stars the people that you saw in the earlier movie, and it's just a whole lot of fun. Are we good to go? Alrighty, let her rip, Tater Chip. We're going to watch Moonshine. They made stupid movies in 1918, but they did have their funny parts, you had to admit. That was Roscoe Arbuckle, along with Al St. John, Buster Keaton, and Alice Lake. And the movie was Moonshine, two real short from the Comique studio. And it was comique, but Roscoe always called it comique, just the way it was a French word, the way it was spelled. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. We hope someday, really soon, to have people back in our theater here in Tulsa. Until then, stay warm, everybody. It's a cold day today, and we'll see you next month for the second Saturday Silence at the Circle Cinema on 66 Highway in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Bye for now.